I didn't recommend locking anything down. I recommended to the president that we shut the country down. First of all, I didn't recommend locking anything down.
I didn't recommend locking anything down. I didn't recommend locking anything down.
I didn't recommend locking anything down. I recommended to the president that we shut the country down.
With Broken Truth, this is John Davidson, and today we have the lovely and talented Warner Mendenhall, attorney Esquire, out of Ohio, and we're going to discuss a little bit about this pretty impressive lawsuit that just went down against CNN on behalf of a contractor named Zachary Young in the amount of, I think, $5 million. Welcome, Warner.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, John.
So, Warner, can you explain a little bit about this case, defamation with malice?
Yeah, what happens is our press is very protected under the malice standard. And it's actually a fairly high bar that Zachary Young had to overcome, because he has to show that they literally lied about him, or at least that they recklessly disregarded the truth under a malice standard that was set in the 1960s in the Sullivan versus New York Times case. And it's very important that our First Amendment rights and protections are protected and that we have a free press. But we cannot have a free press that acts with malice and recklessly disregards the truth. And that's the standard that Zachary Young met, and that's resulted in this $5 million verdict. So it's actually a superb victory for him. He had some pretty high hurdles to overcome, and he proved that CNN was at the very least reckless in terms of its reporting.
Yeah, I'm looking at a Zero Hedge article about it right now, and it is pretty devastating. Let's see. This may work. Every 2 seconds they like to pop up something. But yeah, it's funny. The news is running from reporting this story because I think this is kind of devastating. And it's on the heels of ABC's lawsuit, or Trump's lawsuit against ABC, where they just capitulated, right? What did they give? 15 million?
Right. A ton of money.
What does this mean for people who have maybe been taken advantage of by these news organizations?
Well, I really think our news organizations in general, not all of them, but in general, like especially places like CNN, MSNBC, have really lost their way. They are so tied up in an ideology and a framework within which they operate that they can no longer see reality, and they're no longer reporting reality to the public. And it's really, it's unfortunate for the public. It's unfortunate for those organizations. And I think that what's happening is you're seeing their viewership fall off. People know they're being lied to. They know that these are not reliable sources of information anymore. And that's really what's happened to them. This trial really was, I did see some of the Zero Hedge articles, and I'll tell you, I want to tell you something that popped out at me. The attorneys that were involved were really not doing a very good job. And in fact, at one point, the judge ordered the attorney for CNN to apologize to Zachary Young in the courtroom. I mean, I couldn't believe it, because the attorney himself was so misrepresenting CNN's case that he was ordered to apologize. So you can imagine. I can only imagine, what was happening in that courtroom. That is actually a very embarrassing fact out of this case. So I don't think I've ever heard of that in a court of law. But CNN was continuing to try to defend its position, and it was really an indefensible position. And I understand that now they have settled the punitive damages part of this. We don't know what that number is yet.
That's incredible. I exist right now in this space because of my frustration. And I did, by the way, I used to work for CNN in the late 90s.
Right.
Don't hang up. I have to apologize. It used to be a great conversation topic, but now it's sort of a liability. But you've got to go through. I mean, this is them getting spanked. One area that I'm kind of curious about is it possible that networks and big tech and whatnot, this type of defamation, maybe not with malice, but the defamation in general could be expanded a little bit outside of the standard, like in this case, they called him a liar, apparently many times on camera, which is, I mean, I think the judge read it out or in the courtroom. I don't have the details, but it was very apparent how bad CNN was about this. But is it possible that there are more subtle methods of defamation that the courts may begin to investigate?
Well, I mean, the main target, I think, is going to be the press. So we are going to have to we got to use the malice standard, the reckless disregard of the truth. But there certainly are more subtle situations, and I'll give you one. What I have seen is that the vaccine injured have been defamed by the news reporters, both local and national, where they have literally said that someone who's vaccine injured is lying about their vaccine injury. No, they're not. When somebody has been injured and they have an effect within days or even hours sometimes of the vaccine, and they've gotten professional advice about it, and they know that the COVID shot, I even hate to call it a vaccine, by the way, but they know the COVID shot caused these injuries. And the news either will not report on it or will alter the reporting in such a way that their reporting is a reckless disregard of the truth of the dangers of the COVID-19 shots. And I do think there are a number of people that we know that have been defamed by national and even local news organizations in that particular topic area.
One area that I find intriguing is that networks created a brand of misinformation reporters that didn't exist in my day, and I find that branding could that be a liability? I mean, if you have a person who is a designated misinformation reporter, and then that misinformation reporter reports on someone who is maybe not misinformation, could merely that branding and that effort and assigning that reporter be a liability?
Oh, I think it could. I mean, obviously, we as lawyers have to look at the case by case, analysis of what has happened. But when I look at fact checkers who are simply not saying facts,
Yeah.
And in fact, the fact checkers are saying and promoting lies, I become very concerned about that. And I mean, everything through the COVID process, you and I have seen this. We've been fighting against this. Oh my goodness. Oh, it'll stop. It'll stop you from getting the illness. Oh, well, no, it didn't. It'll stop transmission. Oh, no, it didn't. Everything they said to us through this entire process, from our national institutions like the CDC, the NIH, to our local hospitals, our local public health departments, they all lied to us.
Yeah.
They all lied to us. And they all said that we were out of our mind for saying that people ought to be very careful taking a genetic treatment, quote unquote, treatment. When we should have all been very, very skeptical. So look, the American people, the American public, I think has awakened. I think this jury verdict shows that. We see jury verdicts in other arenas in public life right now. We see the employment jury verdicts of 10 million in San Francisco, 12 million in Michigan. We see that medical malpractice verdicts are going up very quickly. I've got anecdotal evidence of that. I don't have a scientific study of that yet, but we can see that what's happened is all of these institutions, media institutions, health institutions, education institutions have all lost credibility with the public. And we don't believe them, and we're going to hold them accountable. I think that's the main effort that our firm is engaged in here going forward the next few years.
It's so astounding to watch the past few weeks, especially this week. Rashida Jones left MSNBC.
Mm-hmm.
She announced her resignation. Coincidentally, members of the FBI, I think, Christopher Wray, didn't he leave this week? So
Last week, Gerald Austin left the military today, I believe. Yeah,
and Warner, I think it was is it Lloyd Austin? Is that who you're talking about?
I'm sorry. Thank you for correcting me. Yes, you got it. Hey,
I'm no attorney. I do wear a suit occasionally.
Okay,
but I think that's correct. Lloyd Austin lost his lawsuit. I believe I don't know how far the case went, but it put the brakes on the military mandate. And I think that case was brought by Todd Callender, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
You know, it it's a wonder what would have happened to this country if it hadn't been for a few of you crazy idiots with bar licenses, willing to lose them. You know, that's an issue, right? You could have your bar license taken away from you uh, if you do a case that they don't like.
Well, that's true, and there are attorneys who have faced disciplinary proceedings throughout the country, and we're pretty aware of those. I certainly don't want to talk about the ones that I know about, but it is a very scary thing to lose a law license or lose a medical license. When you're really trying to do the right thing and you're trying to forward good cases that are valid cases, just simply dealing with our basic core constitutional rights that we all thought we had, and that this past government, the Biden government, sought to strip away from us in the last 4 years. So I think we're at a point that we have a new civil rights movement to restore our rights and to restore and reclaim our Constitution. I think that's really where we are right now.
And could you, this week we also reported on a lawsuit against a civil rights violation lawsuit against MGM Grand Casino for firing an employee for refusing the vaccine mandate in, I think, the fall of 2021. That case was brought by a member of Freedom Council, which is an organization that you are a part of, right?
I am very proud to be a part of Freedom Council. It's really, for people who don't know, I'd call it an alliance of attorneys. They're mainly small firm, sole practitioners that are operating in most of the states in the United States. There are people who are brave enough to step up and to engage in these fights. Many of those are on the employment side, like the MGM Grand, like the BART case in San Francisco. And, it's been phenomenal to be a part of this because the attorneys that are involved help each other. For example, when we do an appellate brief, we'll put an appellate brief on the listserv with the attorneys, and we take input from whoever wants to give us input. They have not only made our briefing better, our arguments better, they've helped us catch errors and problems and just really made us, I'm saying Mendenhall firm, better attorneys. And we try to return the favor and help people review. You always need input from others. And this is a great collaboration among these attorneys. I'll tell you the other thing that happens is as soon as something happens in the legal world, it is posted within Freedom Council for the attorneys to know about right away, so we can all stay up to date on the case law, on developments, so we can stay up to date on what experts are helping, what's going on with trials, all that stuff. So it's just a fantastic community of about 250 attorneys. We certainly welcome other attorneys who are interested in fighting to restore and reclaim the Constitution. That's what Freedom Council is all about.
Yeah, I full disclosure, I have been to a Freedom Council event in June, and you guys were kind enough to show my movie, Epidemic of Fraud, which, by the way, covers a lot of the piles of manure that came out of the network. That's the nicest way I could say it, frankly.
Yeah. Your movie is fantastic. And I think that the American citizens have been victimized by hospital protocols. Your movie demonstrates that really clearly. We have, going forward in the future, we understand that these hospitals essentially committed a fraud on their patients, a fraud on the public. And they billed, for example, for COVID when somebody didn't even have COVID. We've all heard stories of a motorcyclist who came in dead from an accident, classed him as a COVID patient when they really were not. So those are the kinds of frauds that we're able to go after. There's a long statute of limitations. It's a 6-year statute of limitations. And for other attorneys and your audience out there, we use the Federal False Claims Act as the vehicle to bring those cases. We have a number of those cases pending right now. We hope to have many, many more. And we hope that the Freedom Counselors, the Allied Freedom Counselors, will bring many of those across the United States. In particular, I'm going to give you one area that I'm very interested in. These hospitals were mandated. They had a mandate too, but they were mandated to report injury from the COVID-19 shot, and many of them failed to do it. So we think that's a particularly fertile area to file these lawsuits in, and we file those under the Federal False Claims Act.
And does that apply to individual practitioners, pharmacies that administer the shots? How does that apply?
Anyone who administered the shot filed a program participation agreement that said if they are aware of anyone having any kind of injury, it doesn't have to be causally linked. I think that's an important point. It doesn't have to be causally linked, but if you've had an injury after you got the shot, it should be reported. It's mandatory to report it to the VAERS system so we can know what's going on and what the adverse reactions are. So it's supposed to be an early warning system so that the shots can be pulled from the market. And you and I both know the red flags have gone off. From the clinical trials on, and I have that case against Pfizer, the Brooke Jackson case. There's been a fraud. There have been lies told about effectiveness, about injury, and we need to carry that from the clinical trials all the way to reporting injuries. And then we also need to work on recoveries for those people who are injured in terms of getting them their disability payments, their workers' comp payments, whatever compensation we can bring for them.
It's just one last question. If a person, what is the minimum evidence required to force, say, a local Walgreens to alert VAERS, right? Like, because they're going to say, oh, well, we don't know the details. You need to talk to your doctor. But if they administered it, how do you make them do it?
Yeah, here's basically how that would work. They need to be alerted that there's been an injury. So they need to have a chance to do the right thing. And we think that can happen. And we'll be working on a more organized program for this so that the vaccine injured or the shot injured can notify whoever their provider was that there has been an injury and that they have a duty to report to VAERS. If they then fail to report, that creates the basis to bring a lawsuit, a fraud lawsuit against them for the failure to do their duty to report the injuries to VAERS.
And that's a $27,000 fee? Fine?
There is a penalty. It's what it's called. It's not called a fine. I don't know why, but it's called a penalty. And the penalty is, about $27,000 per shot.
And who executes that penalty? Who gets the money, basically?
Well, some of that's going to go back into the federal government because the taxpayers have been ripped off by the fraudulent behavior of the providers, of the companies. So that is going to go back. Some of that's going to go back to the taxpayer, but some of that also goes to the whistleblowers who brought that forward. They can be patients. They don't have to be a CVS employee. They could be somebody who just got injured. So some of that's going to go to them. And then there is an additional provision to pay the attorney fees on those cases. So the attorneys can actually get paid for the work that they did as well from the defendant, from the particular provider.
That's very interesting. So if you have someone that got 5 shots and from 5 different locations, you need to bring information to them to let them know.
Yep.
And now if it's an organization, like let's say it's Walgreens and we can't remember the name of the person specifically that administered it, is it corporate based or is it personal based?
Well, it's going to be, yes, it could be both, frankly. The providers themselves have a duty, and then the corporation they work for has a duty.
Interesting. So that's a potential moneymaker. If you find a hotspot with a bad batch.
Well, unfortunately, I mean, it is a moneymaker. I wouldn't say that's big money, but it's important money because it holds them accountable. And at this point, we have to start, and we have to work as citizens to hold the providers accountable for what they did to us. And the same thing is true with your hospital bills. If they classified you as COVID when you were not, so they could get all those bonuses, the same type of process can be run on the hospital. So there are a lot of possibilities here to hold the providers accountable at many, many levels. And we have a very long statute of limitations. It's a 6-year statute of limitations that's running. So basically into 2027 would be the end of the statute of limitations. So we've got time to bring these lawsuits and really gear this up.
Excellent. Warner, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I mean, let's think about the fraud more generally, not just the injuries, and I know that's critically important, but we also have a lot of fraud in the PPP and the SBA programs.
Mhm.
And the only reason I want to bring that up is, if you know somebody who's ripped off the taxpayer through those programs, you actually have a 10-year statute of limitations on that. So these are mechanisms to get recoveries. We know our government has been ripped off. We know the taxpayers have been ripped off, but there are some processes ahead of us to right this wrong.
Now, the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program,
Right.
what is the whistleblower reward for that? 30%?
It is anywhere between 15 and 30% of whatever the recovery was. So if the company had $1 million in the PPP program, just do the math on that. It's somewhere between 150 and 300,000 for the person who brings that information forward to try to recover that money. And I can tell you right now, there are hundreds of those lawsuits pending right now, and there are actually literally tens of thousands to go.
The bar of entry for the PPP program was pretty low.
Yeah.
Lots of hairdressers suddenly.
Well,
popped up all over.
I mean, to be honest with you, on a program like that, we're more interested in the holding companies, maybe a holding company that held 5 smaller companies. The smaller companies independently might have been eligible, but because they're held by a hedge fund or a holding company, they were ineligible. They had more employees than were qualified. So that's one of the possibilities. And I think that process was abused. Many holding companies abused the process. And I think that's where I would be looking if I were someone who was interested in that. You may also know of an individual who, got the money and bought a Ferrari. I mean, that stuff happened as well. Yeah.
Right.
We had one of those. And in fact, that case, we have a judgment on that case right now. So there are all kinds of permutations out there. But, if you know about fraud, we are working with, our firm does fraud cases. And we also have freedom counselors, many lawyers throughout the United States who do those.
Well, Warner, thank you so much for taking time to meet with me on such short notice.
Oh, no, it's much appreciated. Everything you do is appreciated. Thank you. Let's
All
get
right,
the word
great.
out. Let's get truth in reporting again.
Yeah, what a novel concept. So everybody, this is brokentruth.tv. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Freedom Council is nothing without all of you. How do we go about getting people held criminally responsible for their acts? The military is still at risk. Election interference, the medicalization of childhood. These drug dealers like Pfizer and Moderna, we can seize their property. We develop our litigation through conferences like this. It's going to come through communications. It's going to come through conversations. And Freedom Council is that conversation.
For information, visit freedomcouncil.org.